So Abram and Sarai were sitting in their recliner. They're in their retirement years, their golden years. They have on their fuzzy slippers, and they think this is about as good as life is going to get. They think they know what is in store. They have their 401ks all laid out, and then God speaks into their life, into the familiarity of what is, and calls them to leave their recliner, set aside their fuzzy slippers, leave everything they know, armed with the most unlikely of promises that in their old age they will be graced with a child. And so they step out in faith. Have you ever taken a step of faith? Have you ever set upon a course that others, in looking at you with any level of objectivity, think it's a fool's errand? But still you took that step of faith. 20 plus years later, Abram and Sarai, well into their 70s, have left the familiarity and they are traveling to unknown countries, foreign land, and still they are waiting for the promise to be realized. And now they are up in years, 99 and 100. And truth be told, they have given up on believing that the promise of God, that they will have a child, they have given up on that promise. And they probably believe in their heart of hearts that they have made a huge mistake. We pick up the story in Genesis chapter 17, verse 6. But God says to them 20 years later, I will make you very fruitful. I will make nations of you, and kings will come to you. I will establish an everlasting covenant between me and you and your descendants after you for generations to come, to be your God and the God of your descendants as well. And then God ups the ante, doubles down, and says this in verse 5 and in verse 15. In fact, says God, no longer will you be known as Abram, but you will have a new name, Abraham. And no longer will your name be Sarai, but your name will be Sarah. You become new beings, people with a new identity, because 20 years ago you heard my voice and you said yes. Verse 16, God says, I will bless her and will surely give you a son by her. I will bless her so that she will be the mother of nations. Kings of peoples will come to her. Imagine this most unlikely, improbable, let's be honest, impossible promise. And how does God respond? How does Abraham respond? Verse 17. Abraham fell face down. He laughed, and he said to himself, will a son be born to a man 100 years old, to a woman aged 90? Abraham laughs at God's promise. You ever laugh at God? Ever think that is impossible? Richard Bach, the writer, says, argue for your limitations long enough, and sure enough, they're yours. Ever argue for your limitations? Ever think this is as good as it gets? No, it's not going to get any better. I hope it won't get any worse, but this is the way it is. Do we argue for our limitations as a church, as individuals? I'm going to repeat a story I told maybe a year or so ago, but it's just a powerful story for me. When I was a young guy, thick chestnut, wavy hair, I was living for a year in Helena, Montana, doing an internship at a church. I'm a kid from Rhode Island. Being in Montana, the land of cowboys and Indians, it was like a dream come true. And one day I got a call from my friend Jock. Actually, it was 11 p.m., member of the church, and said, Kent, I need you to do a favor. My brother-in-law, Billy, has gone missing. We need to get in my truck. We need to drive over the Continental Divide to Missoula, Montana, which is 3 hours away, because my wife is really worried. Now, I knew a little about Billy. I knew he was an alcoholic. I knew that he had lost his leg as a young man trying to jump onto a train when he was drunk, and his leg was severed. He was 16 years of age. I know he had been wrestling with alcohol all these years, and now he was about 28, and Billy had gone missing. We knew that he liked to go into Missoula, which has a lot of bars, and so I got in the truck with Jock about 11 o'clock at night, and we got into Missoula around 1 or 2 in the morning. And we started going from bar to bar. By about the 7th bar, we keep asking people, have you seen Billy? Well, we saw him earlier, but he's not here now. Finally, we come to the Top Hat Saloon, which sounds a lot fancier than it is. Promise me you'll never go to the Top Hat Saloon if you're in Missoula. And there, passed out underneath a pool table, was Billy. His artificial leg was missing. Never did find it. We picked him up. We carried him to Jock's truck. We put him in the back of Jock's truck, threw an old horse blanket over Billy, who was still passed out, and we drove the 3 hours back to Helena. One of the saddest characters I've ever seen. And I remember thinking to myself, there's no hope for this man. We face many challenges today. 100 young people from Parkland High School got into a bus, chartered buses, went to Tallahassee to the state legislature to ask their legislatures to outlaw assault weapons and to put in background checks so that students like themselves wouldn't have to suffer what they had suffered. And the legislature refused to even debate what the young people had brought before them. Our president has said this week that the answer isn't a ban on assault weapons, but to arm teachers as a means of defending our schools. The NRA seems to have a stranglehold on enough elected officials that we think, many of us, I know in my moments of despair, I think hope is lost. One of the students said, when speaking to the legislators, we live in a society where the children act like adults and the adults act like children. A few days after the shooting in Parkland, I received this message from my friend Barbara Curtis, who is a preschool teacher in Oregon. 2 days after the Parkland shooting, this is what she said. We had a legit lockdown at school this morning due to a stranger on campus with a backpack looking in classroom windows from outside. All is well, but it was terrifying. I don't know what he was up to. Apparently, he was suffering from some kind of a mental health issue. The police came. It was one of my students' birthday today. It's a preschooler. And when we were in hiding inside the hallway between 2 classrooms, I just kept thinking, I will not let Maya die on her birthday. I held it together until my morning class left. Then I sat in my classroom and sobbed. How do we hold on to faith when all the signs of hope seem to go unmet? 1,000 years or so after the Genesis story of Abraham and Sarah, a descendant of this unlikely couple walked the streets of Jerusalem. His name was Jesus. This descendant of old Abraham and Sarah bore witness to an unconventional path. In a world that honored the power of empire, Jesus honored the way of the selfless servant. In Mark's Gospel, chapter 8, verse 34, Jesus said, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me." And then verse 35, "For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and for the sake of the gospel will save it." This paradox of Jesus, that the way of God is the way of taking up one's cross, which is another way of saying paying a price for the gospel of love. It didn't make sense to Jesus' disciples. Peter wanted to talk him out of it. That's why Jesus rebuked Peter. The promise of God seemed hopeless to the disciples then. This way of selflessness, this way of servanthood, this way of being the least and paradoxically becoming the greatest. It was hard for the disciples then and for disciples like us today to grasp. This is your hope, says Jesus. This is the path you are to follow, and you will be free. The disciples were called to believe it then and to believe it today. This is your hope, says Jesus. This improbable promise, the path of love, of selflessness, of forgiveness, of reconciliation, that is the way, not the way of assault weapons, not the way of the empire, the way of selfless love. About 10 or 12 years after riding back over the Continental Divide with Billy in the back, still sleeping it off, with my friend Jock driving. About 10 or 12 years later, I ran into Jock, and we were catching up on one another's life, and I said, and I was really hesitant to ask because I expected the absolute worst. I said, "Whatever happened to Billy?" I thought for sure he would say Billy was dead. This big smile broke open on Jock's face. He said, "You didn't hear?" He said, "Do you remember that night at the Top Hat Saloon?" I said, "Yes, I do." "Do you remember what a sorry case Billy was that night?" I said, "Yes, I do." I said, he said, "That was his wake-up call. That was the last night he took a drink. That was the bottom that he had hit. And he began to rebuild his life. He went back and he got his college degree. And then he went to medical school. And now he's on the staff at the Ireland Cancer Center in Seattle, Washington. And he's been working there for the last 3 years. You could have knocked me over with a feather. I thought there was no hope for Billy. God sees our potential always, not our imperfections. The young witnesses of Parkland High School have not given up in envisioning a world where children don't live in fear of mass shootings, where teachers can just teach and not become security guards, where ready access to assault weapons is not accepted as the norm. It's said in Scripture that a child will lead us. My hope, my prayer, my guess is your hope and prayer is that these young people with their idealism who have lived through such trauma will be the ones to bring us as a nation to our senses. They have not given up on hope. And we are not to give up on hope either. We are to stand with them and for them. I understand that on March 24th, the Parkland students have called for nationwide marches. And I understand that here in Beverly and the North Shore, plans are being made as we speak. And the young people will be leading us. The promise to Abraham and Sarah, the promise of Jesus remains true. I have made before you an everlasting covenant. Don't give up, Abraham. Have faith, Sarah. God is with you. William Sloane Coffin, the theologian, said, I love the radicalness of faith. First you leap, and then you grow wings. Our faith is calling us in trying times to take a leap of faith, not just a step of faith, and to trust that God will grace us with the wings to fly. Do we believe that to be true? Abraham and Sarah, I will make of you a mighty nation. I will make an everlasting covenant with you, with us. When we believe that to be true, nothing is impossible. Not the challenges or the darkness of any given moment. I love the radicalness of faith. First you leap, and then you grow wings. Amen.